The end of the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliphate, mired in luxury and internal strife, is engulfed by an unprecedented uprising. Just as slaves once led by Spartacus challenged the Roman Empire, so too did thousands of black Zanj slaves rise up to fight against one of the most powerful empires of their time. The Zanj rebellion became not just a struggle for freedom, but also a symbol of the deep social and political contradictions within the Caliphate. Welcome to the Amazing History channel and our episode about the Zanj rebellion, the largest slave uprising in the history of Islam. As always, you can support us through YouTube sponsorship, Patreon, or PayPal. Don't forget to like and leave your opinion in the comments. Let's get to the topic of the video. Slavery is a dark chapter in history that many cultures and civilizations have gone through, and Arabia was no exception. In pre-Islamic times, Mecca was not only an important religious center, but also a major trading hub where African and Asian slaves were sold. Despite the emergence of Islam, which introduced certain restrictions and rules for dealing with slaves, it was impossible to completely prohibit slavery, because slavery was deeply rooted in the economy and social structure of the Arab world. The term Zinji was used by Arabs and Persians to refer to many different ethnic and linguistic groups inhabiting the coastal regions of East Africa. In the Abbasid Caliphate, especially during its golden age, many Zinji were brought in to perform extremely exhausting labor in the south of Mesopotamia. Slaves were used to drain swamps and cultivate salt marshes in the area of Shat al-Arab and the lower reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates. These lands were considered some of the most difficult to cultivate, but they could become valuable agricultural areas. The main tasks of the Zanj were to remove salt from the land, extract salt from seawater, and prepare the soil for growing crops such as cotton and sugarcane. The living conditions of the Zinj were extremely harsh. The slaves were placed in large camps, sometimes with several thousand people. Their dwellings were miserable huts made of reeds and palm leaves. These camps were located right on swampy lands, full of mosquitoes that spread diseases such as malaria. In addition to the terrible sanitary conditions, the slaves suffered from malnutrition. Their diet consisted of small portions of flour, semolina, and dates, which only worsened their physical exhaustion. The harsh living and working conditions of the black Zanj slaves in southern Mesopotamia contributed to the development of a sense of solidarity among them, despite ethnic, linguistic, and religious differences. These shared hardships united people who were ready to fight for their freedom and created the groundwork for future organized resistance. By the time the Zanj rebellion began in 869, the Abbasid Caliphate had been weakened by numerous internal and external crises. Its territories in Spain had already passed to the Umayyad Emirate in 756. Power in Morocco was seized by the Idrisid dynasty at the end of the 8th century, and in North Africa, the Aghlabids established themselves at the beginning of the 9th century. Other crises, such as the anarchy at Samarra, were accompanied by the overthrow of 4 caliphs in a row. The separation of Egypt under the rule of the Tulunid dynasty and the expansion of the Safarids in Persia only contributed to the creation of ideal conditions for a slave uprising. Despite the obvious problems, the living and working conditions of the Zanj in the Abbasid Caliphate did not improve. Every year, they were brought in large numbers to work in the harshest conditions of southern Mesopotamia, which only further aggravated the existing discontent. It was at this critical moment that a man named Ali ibn Muhammad appeared on the scene. He was neither a slave nor black. However, he remains a controversial figure. Some see him as a defender of the oppressed and a fighter for justice. Others believe that he used social tension for his own political ambitions. Regardless of his true motives, he became the catalyst and leader of the Zanj rebellion. So let's take a closer look at him. The origins of Ali ibn Muhammad are shrouded in mystery and contradictions. He claimed to be a descendant of Ali ibn Abu Talib, the 4th righteous caliph, asserting kinship with the Prophet himself, which could have given more weight to his claims to leadership. However, this claim is doubted by many historians who consider it an attempt to strengthen his political legitimacy. Other sources, however, claim that he was of Persian origin. Be that as it may, he was well educated and was knowledgeable in literature and poetry. Ali led the life of a preacher and a writer, traveling through various regions of the Caliphate. Thanks to his knowledge and oratory skills, he was able to influence people effectively, which played an important role in his future uprising. He first became known in 863 when he moved to Bahrain, one of the most important Shia centers of the Caliphate. It was here that he declared himself a prophet or leader sent to liberate the oppressed. He skillfully used Islamic rhetoric to strengthen his position, preaching equality and justice. Such statements helped him attract various supporters to his side, including the poor and peasants. At some point, they began to revere Ali ibn Muhammad as a prophet and king, and even started collecting taxes in his name. There were many preachers like Ali at that time, so at first he didn't attract much attention, but soon Ali's actions forced the authorities to respond, and they quickly dispersed the gathering of his followers. As a result, Ali lost his authority in Bahrain, and together with his closest followers, he was forced to flee to Basra, which is in southern Mesopotamia. Well, even there, the enterprising adventurer didn't sit idle. He intended to take advantage of the ongoing struggle between the two clans in the city by securing the support of one of the factions. At the same time, Ali tried to resume his religious sermons at the main mosque of Basra. But the local authorities saw this as stirring up unrest and quickly arrested Ali along with his companions. Ali ibn Muhammad was imprisoned in the city of Wasit, but he managed to escape. After that, he went to Baghdad, where he continued his activities, trying to attract supporters. His loyal companion was a black freedman named Sulaiman ibn Jami, who actively assisted Ali in his affairs. They began to promote their cause among the local population, including the slaves. One of Ali's significant allies was an African named Raykan ibn Salih, who was something like a foreman among a group of slaves in Basra. An important role was played by the fact that Raykan, being responsible for other slaves, had authority among them and could influence their decisions. Ali promised to make him a commander if the uprising was successful. This alliance was probably a strategic move by Ali, as he sought to use Raykan's authority among the slaves to build a support network. Soon after that, in September 869, Ali ibn Muhammad and his supporters began intercepting groups of slaves in the marshes of Basra and preaching to them about rising up against oppression. Ali, as a skilled orator and charismatic leader, skillfully used religious rhetoric to inspire the slaves to fight. He called himself a savior sent by Allah and promised to improve their living conditions. He also adopted some elements of the Kharijite ideology, especially their claim that the most worthy should rule, even if it is a slave. However, not all aspects of the uprising were aimed at the complete abolition of slavery. Ali ibn Muhammad promised his followers that they would not only be freed, but also become wealthy and even be able to own slaves themselves. This shows that Ali's goal was not to fight for the abolition of slavery as a system, but to improve the situation of certain groups, primarily those who supported him. By the end of 869, the uprising had gained significant momentum. Around 15,000 slaves and poor people had joined it. Ali ibn Muhammad became known as Sahib az-Zanj, the leader of the Zanj, and began to preach ideas of equality and justice, but also supported the idea of fair distribution of wealth among his followers. The Abbasid authorities did not immediately pay attention to the Zanj uprising, as they were occupied with numerous internal and external crises, which I mentioned earlier. This allowed the Zanj, despite their weak organization and poor supply of weapons and armor, to achieve several victories in the early stages of the uprising. This was achieved through sudden attacks on small detachments of the Caliphate. One of the well-known episodes of the uprising describes a rebel fighting with nothing but a plate in his hands. This indicates the lack of equipment among the Zanj, but also highlights their determination and willingness to fight even under such conditions. The early successes allowed the rebels to seize weapons, provisions, and means of transportation such as boats and horses. This helped improve their armaments and allowed them to begin larger and more organized operations. It is worth noting that Ali ibn Muhammad led an army that was diverse in its composition. Among his troops were black slaves from various regions of East Africa who spoke different languages, so he had to command through several interpreters. This highlights that the Zanj were not a homogeneous ethnic group, but rather a mix of people from different cultures and tribes. Not only slaves joined the uprising, but also free poor people, craftsmen, and peasants. Although the core of the rebel army was indeed made up of freed slaves, who replenished the ranks of the insurgents. After each new victory, a significant part of the forces also consisted of mercenary soldiers. One of the most serious blows to the Abbasid Caliphate was the desertion of black slave soldiers who served in its army. They began to leave the ranks of the Caliphate and join their Zanj brothers, which not only weakened the military power of the empire, but also showed that control over the slaves was beginning to weaken even within its own military structures. The initial successes of the Zanj were due to several factors. First, they were well acquainted with the marshy terrain of southern Mesopotamia, which served as a natural defense and was difficult for the Abbasid troops to traverse. Second, they understood their weaknesses, such as a lack of heavy weaponry and poor organization, so they used guerrilla warfare tactics. They avoided direct confrontations with the large armies of the caliphates, instead attacking isolated detachments and camps, which allowed them to gradually accumulate resources and weapons. Third, although the Zanj army was a motley group of irregular militias, it was highly disciplined and used this advantage to maximum effect. Even women participated in the uprising. Mostly, of course, they were involved in supplying the troops, but sometimes they took part directly in the fighting, throwing stones and bricks at the enemy. After several quick victories, including the capture of the ports of Ubala and Abadan, the Zanj set their sights on capturing the important city of Basra, a strategic center of the region. However, their first attempt to take Basra failed. Instead of continuing the siege, they decided to establish their own fortified city on the dry plain southeast of Basra, naming it Al-Mukhtar, which translates as the chosen city. This city was built as a fortress, surrounded by canals, including a main canal crossed by two bridges. Inside, catapults were installed, and the buildings were made of brick and palm leaves. Among the key structures were the palace of Ali ibn Muhammad, a mosque, a prison, and markets. By 871, just 2 years after the uprising began, the Zanj started minting their own currency, which was an important step in the formation of their state. This currency was used for trade with Bedouin tribes, who played a key role in supplying the rebels with food and other vital goods, highlighting their dependence on external support. The uprising continued in that same year, 871. The rebels finally managed to capture Basra. The capture of such an important city became a key moment in the development of the uprising, but it was accompanied by large-scale violence. The brutal massacre carried out by the rebels led to the mass killing of civilians, both Muslims and non-Muslims. The Arab historian al-Masudi mentions that the Zanj supposedly left behind 300,000 corpses. However, this number is probably greatly exaggerated and is more a symbol of the scale of the tragedy than an exact statistic. The capture of Basra dealt a serious blow to the Caliphate. After that, the Zanj became even more dangerous, beginning to control key trade and transportation routes that connected Baghdad with the southern provinces, which significantly disrupted the capital's supply lines. Strengthening their power in the south, in 872 they captured the city of Wasit and the surrounding areas, coming very close to Baghdad. After that, the Caliphate could no longer ignore the threat. The Zanj rebellion turned into a serious crisis that threatened the stability of Abbasid rule and made it necessary to mobilize all available resources to suppress the uprising. In 880, the Abbasid Caliphate finally took decisive action to suppress the Zanj rebellion by sending al-Muwafaq, the brother of Caliph al-Mutamid, to lead the troops. Al-Muwafaq led a major military campaign against the rebels, which included not only land forces but also a powerful fleet. The fleet was crucial for waging war in the marshy and riverine areas of southern Mesopotamia, where the Caliphate's forces needed to move through difficult terrain and block the trade routes that supplied the rebels. Over several years, al-Muwafaq managed to inflict a series of defeats on the Zanj, gradually pushing them back toward the rebels' capital, al-Mukhtara. This city was heavily fortified by the rebels and served as their main base. Realizing the importance of the siege, al-Muwafaq imposed a complete blockade of the city. Merchants who supplied the rebels with provisions and essential goods were cut off from delivering supplies to al-Mukhtara, which quickly led to hunger and a decline in morale among the defenders. To increase the pressure, al-Muwafaq ordered the construction of a fortified outpost opposite al-Mukhtara, from which the Abbasid troops could bombard the city. According to some sources, this bombardment included the use of molten lead, which added terrible suffering to the besieged. In parallel with the military pressure, al-Muwafaq offered amnesty to those who laid down their arms, promising that they would not be returned to slavery. This move was aimed at breaking the resolve of the Zanj to fight to the end. In 883, another Abbasid commander, Lulu, joined al-Muwafaq's campaign, commanding significant forces. The combined besieging army grew to 50,000 men, and on August 5, 883, the decisive assault on al-Mukhtara began. After 6 days of fierce fighting, the Zanj capital fell. Ali ibn Muhammad was captured and executed. He was beheaded, and the rebellion, which had lasted nearly 15 years, was finally crushed. The Zanj rebellion is difficult to classify, as it was not aimed at abolishing slavery or democratizing the Caliphate. It arose as a reaction to harsh working conditions, especially in the marshes of Basra, and had a racial character, since most of the rebels were black slaves from Africa. There was a racial hierarchy in the Caliphate, where black slaves were considered less valuable and performed the hardest work. Such discrimination strengthened the sense of solidarity among the Zanj, which Ali ibn Muhammad took advantage of. Although the uprising was suppressed, it led to important consequences. For example, the Arab world no longer practiced slavery on such a large scale as on plantations, and the rebellion dealt a serious blow to the economy of southern Mesopotamia, which contributed to the further decline of the Abbasid Caliphate. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.